War changes everything. Some wounds never heal. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, humanity finds a way to shine through. A war veteran cries at a Bruce Springsteen concert. Days later, the boss appears at his door. What happened next will restore your faith in the power of human connection. This is a story about music, healing, and unexpected kindness. About how one moment of vulnerability can change two lives forever. War veteran cries at Bruce Springsteen show, but that was only the beginning. Get ready for a journey that proves heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the person you least expect becomes your salvation. War veteran cries at Bruce Springsteen show. Days later, the boss appears at the door. The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of the small suburban house in Freehold, New Jersey. Inside, 62-year-old Tommy Mackenzie sat in his worn leather recliner, staring at the framed photograph on the side table. The black and white image showed a young soldier in Vietnam fatigues, smiling confidently at the camera. That soldier bore little resemblance to the weathered man who now gazed at it with hollow eyes. Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his morning coffee. The tremor had started after his return from Vietnam in 1971, a constant reminder of the battles that raged not just overseas, but within his own mind. 53 years had passed since that helicopter lifted him out of the jungle, but the war had never truly ended for him. The house around him told the story of a life half-lived, sparse furniture, drawn curtains, and an overwhelming silence that seemed to press against the walls. His wife Margaret had tried for 30 years to fill this space with warmth and laughter. She'd succeeded for a while, but the weight of Tommy's nightmares, his sudden outbursts, and his gradual withdrawal from the world had eventually worn her down. The divorce papers had been signed 3 years ago, though she still called every Sunday to check on him. His children, now adults with families of their own, visited less frequently than they once did. Tommy understood. He wasn't easy to be around. The man who had once coached Little League and built tree houses had slowly been replaced by someone who jumped at sudden noises and struggled to connect with the people he loved most. The morning routine was always the same. Coffee, staring at old photographs, then the long stretch of empty hours until evening came and brought with it the prospect of another sleepless night. Today felt no different until the doorbell rang. Tommy rarely had visitors. The UPS driver knew to leave packages by the door. His few remaining friends had learned not to drop by unannounced after too many awkward encounters with his unpredictable moods. He considered ignoring the bell, but something made him shuffle to the window and peek through the curtain. A woman in her 30s stood on his porch, holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of practiced smile that suggested she was selling something. Tommy almost turned away, but she caught sight of him through the glass and waved enthusiastically. Resigned, he unlocked the multiple deadbolts he'd installed and opened the door just wide enough to speak through the chain. "Mr. Mackenzie, my name is Sarah Chen, and I'm with the Monmouth County Veterans Outreach Program. I know you probably get tired of people checking on you, but I was hoping we could talk for just a few minutes." Tommy studied her face. There was something genuine in her expression that set her apart from the parade of social workers and VA representatives who had knocked on his door over the years. Still, he'd learned to be cautious. "I'm doing fine," he said automatically. "Don't need any help." Sarah nodded understandingly. "I'm sure you are managing just fine, Mr. Mackenzie. Actually, I'm not here to offer help. I'm here because someone reached out to our program specifically asking about you, and I thought you'd want to know about it." This caught Tommy's attention. He couldn't imagine who would be asking about him. Who? "May I come in?" This might be a conversation better had sitting down. Against his better judgment, Tommy found himself removing the chain and opening the door wider. Sarah stepped inside, and her eyes immediately went to the wall of military memorabilia that dominated the living room. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman Badge, unit citations, the tangible remnants of a young man's service to his country. Vietnam? She asked softly. 1st Cavalry Division, 1970 to 1971. Tommy replied automatically. Sarah nodded respectfully before settling into the chair across from his recliner. She opened her clipboard and pulled out a manila folder. Mackenzie,
Mister.
3 days ago, someone called our main office asking about Vietnam veterans in the Freehold area who might be struggling with isolation and PTSD. Specifically, they were looking for a man named Thomas Mackenzie, who served in Vietnam and might need some companionship. Tommy's brow furrowed. I don't understand. Who was asking? Sarah smiled. That's what makes this unusual. The person wouldn't give their name, but they left a very generous donation to our program and specifically requested that we reach out to you. They said they had met you recently and were concerned about your well-being. I haven't met anyone recently, Tommy protested. I barely leave the house except for groceries and doctor's appointments. Think carefully, Mr. Mackenzie. In the past week or two, have you been anywhere public, even briefly? Tommy ran a hand through his grey hair, trying to remember. His days blended together in their monotonous routine. I went to the grocery store last Tuesday, and... He paused, a memory surfacing. I went to that concert at the PNC Arts Center, but I left early. What concert? Bruce Springsteen. My neighbor had an extra ticket, said I needed to get out of the house. Tommy's voice grew quieter. It was a mistake. Too many people, too loud. I had to leave. Sarah leaned forward with interest. Can you tell me what happened? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. The memory of that night was still fresh and painful. I don't know why I agreed to go. Haven't been to a concert in decades. But Mrs. Patterson next door, she's been after me for months to get out more. Her son couldn't use his ticket, so she basically forced me to take it. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grey October day. The music was... It was powerful. Springsteen was singing about working men, about struggle, about America. Songs I'd heard on the radio but never really listened to. And then he played Born in the USA Says, and something just broke inside me. Tommy's voice cracked slightly. People were cheering, singing along, waving flags, but they didn't understand. That song, it's not what people think it is. It's about soldiers coming home to nothing, about being forgotten and thrown away, about the lie we were told about what our service meant. Sarah remained silent, sensing that Tommy needed to continue. I started crying, right there in the middle of all those people having a good time. Couldn't stop. 53 years of holding it in, and it all came pouring out during a rock song. He turned back to face her. I had to leave. Made a fool of myself pushing through the crowd, crying like a baby. Don't know how anyone could have noticed me in all that chaos. But someone had noticed. Sarah opened her folder and pulled out a photograph that made Tommy's breath catch in his throat. It was a picture from the concert, clearly taken by a professional photographer. In the foreground was Bruce Springsteen on stage, guitar in hand, captured mid-song. But in the background, barely visible in the crowd, was a figure being helped toward the exit by security. Even in the grainy image, Tommy could see his own face, streaked with tears. The person who called us sent this, Sarah explained gently. They said they saw you during the concert and were moved by your obvious pain. They wanted to make sure you weren't suffering alone. Tommy stared at the photograph, confusion and embarrassment washing over him. I don't understand. Who takes pictures of random people crying at concerts? And why would they care about some broken-down old soldier? I think, Sarah said carefully, that the person who saw you understood exactly what you were going through, and they wanted to help without making you feel like charity case. Over the next hour, Sarah explained the Veterans Outreach Program. They offered companionship visits, help with daily tasks, transportation to appointments, and most importantly, someone to talk to who understood the unique challenges faced by combat veterans. Tommy found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. The worst part, he admitted, is feeling like I'm the only one. Everyone else from my unit either died over there or came home and got on with their lives. I feel like I got stuck somewhere between the jungle and home, and I can't find my way to either place." Sarah nodded understandingly. "That's more common than you think, Mr. Mackenzie. A lot of veterans feel that way, especially those who served in Vietnam. The reception you received when you came home was different from other wars." "Spat on at the airport in San Francisco," Tommy said quietly. "Called a baby killer by people who never saw combat. Told I was part of an immoral war by protesters who didn't know the difference between soldiers and politicians. Came home expecting parades and found protests instead. I'm sorry that happened to you. You deserved better." For the first time in years, Tommy felt truly heard. Sarah stayed for another 2 hours, discussing practical matters and setting up regular visits. When she finally left, the house felt less empty than it had in months. That evening, Tommy found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He put on music. Not Springsteen, not yet, but some old Creedence Clearwater revival that had played constantly on Armed Forces radio during his tour. As Have You Ever Seen the Rain filled the quiet house, Tommy allowed himself to remember not just the horror of war, but some of the good times too. The friendships forged in impossible circumstances, the moments of beauty that could be found even in the darkest places, the pride he'd felt in serving his country despite everything that came after. 3 days later, Tommy was in his kitchen making lunch when the doorbell rang again. He'd grown to dread that sound, but Sarah had mentioned she might stop by this week, so he didn't hesitate to answer. He opened the door to find a man in his 70s standing on his porch, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a weathered leather jacket. The man's face was familiar in the way that celebrities' faces are familiar, but it took Tommy's brain a moment to process what he was seeing. "Mr. Mackenzie," the man said in a voice that Tommy had heard countless times on the radio. "My name is Bruce Springsteen. I was wondering if we could talk." Tommy stared, certain he was hallucinating. The medication he took for his PTSD sometimes caused vivid dreams that seemed real, but he was definitely awake. Standing on his porch was Bruce Springsteen, not a lookalike, not an impersonator, but the boss himself. What? How did you—" Tommy stammered. Bruce smiled gently. "May I come in? I know this is unexpected, but I promise I can explain everything." Still in shock, Tommy stepped aside and let Bruce Springsteen into his living room. Bruce's eyes immediately went to the wall of military honors, just as Sarah's had. "Vietnam?" Bruce asked respectfully. "First Cav," Tommy managed to say. "But why are you here?" Bruce settled into the same chair Sarah had occupied, looking completely at ease despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I saw you at my concert last week, during Born in the USA. You were crying and you left during the song. I couldn't get you out of my mind." Tommy felt heat rise to his cheeks. "I made a fool of myself. I shouldn't have gone." "No," Bruce said firmly. "You didn't make a fool of yourself. You had the most honest reaction to that song I've seen in years. Most people hear it as a patriotic anthem and miss the point entirely. You understood what I was really saying." Tommy sank into his recliner, still trying to process the fact that Bruce Springsteen was sitting in his living room. "Your song. It brought up a lot of memories, things I try to keep buried." Bruce leaned forward. "That song was written for people like you, Mr. Mackenzie. Vietnam veterans who came home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what you'd been through. The title is ironic. It's about the betrayal of American promises, not a celebration of them." "I figured that out about 40 years too late," Tommy said with a bitter laugh. "Tell me about your service," Bruce said gently. And Tommy found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades, talking openly about Vietnam. Not the sanitized version he gave to doctors or social workers, but the real story. He told Bruce about the friends he'd lost, the fear that was his constant companion, the moral complexity of fighting a war that felt increasingly pointless with each passing day. Bruce listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions, and sharing his own struggles with understanding the Vietnam era despite being too young to serve. He talked about growing up in Freehold, watching older boys from his neighborhood leave for war and return changed or not return at all. My father worked at the Ford plant, Bruce said. He was in World War II, and he understood duty and sacrifice. But Vietnam was different. The boys coming back from your war carried something in their eyes that the World War II veterans didn't have, a kind of confusion and hurt that went beyond physical wounds. We didn't know what we were fighting for, Tommy admitted. World War II guys, they knew they were fighting evil. We were fighting communism, but nobody could explain why that mattered to a rice farmer in the Mekong Delta, made it hard to justify the things we had to do. They talked for hours. Bruce was nothing like Tommy had expected a rock star to be. There was no ego, no pretension, just a genuine interest in Tommy's story and a deep empathy for his struggles. When Tommy mentioned his isolation since his wife left, Bruce nodded understandingly. I've been married to Patty for over 30 years, but there were times in my life when I felt completely alone, even in a room full of people. Depression is like that. It makes you feel like you're watching life through glass, unable to connect with anyone. You dealt with depression? Tommy asked, surprised. For years. Started therapy in my 30s because I realized I was repeating patterns from my childhood that were destructive. My father struggled with his own demons after the war, and I inherited some of those struggles. The difference is I had resources and support that a lot of people don't have. As the afternoon wore on, Tommy found himself laughing for the first time in months. Bruce had a way of finding humor in difficult situations without minimizing their seriousness. He told stories about his early days playing small clubs, about the struggle to make it in music, about the responsibility he felt to the working-class people who made up his audience. When I wrote Born in the USA, I wanted to tell the story of Vietnam veterans who felt abandoned by their country, Bruce explained. But the irony is that the song became this patriotic sing-along that completely missed the point. Ronald Reagan even tried to use it in his campaign. I had to publicly tell him he was misunderstanding the message. Must have been frustrating, Tommy said. It was, but it also taught me something important about the power of music. People hear what they need to hear, sometimes regardless of what you intended. That song meant one thing to Reagan's supporters and something completely different to you. Both reactions were valid, even though they were opposite. As evening approached, Bruce showed no signs of leaving. Instead, he asked Tommy if he'd like to order dinner, as if they were old friends catching up, rather than a rock star and a fan meeting for the first time. I have to ask, Tommy said, as they waited for Chinese takeout to arrive. How did you find me, and why? You must have thousands of fans who have emotional reactions to your music. Bruce was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. After the concert, I couldn't stop thinking about you. There was something about the way you reacted to that song that told me you weren't just any fan having an emotional moment. You were living the story I was trying to tell. So I had my people reach out to local veterans organizations, asking if they knew of any Vietnam vets in the area who might need some support. That was you who donated to the outreach program? It was, but I wanted to meet you in person, not just write a check. Money helps, but sometimes people need to know that their story matters to someone. The food arrived, and they ate at Tommy's small kitchen table, continuing their conversation. Bruce asked about Tommy's life before Vietnam, his family, his dreams and disappointments. In return, he shared stories about his own journey, the challenges of fame, the responsibility he felt to his audience. You know what struck me most about seeing you at the concert, Bruce said. You were the only person in that crowd who really understood what that song was about. Everyone else was singing along to what they thought was a patriotic anthem, but you were hearing the pain underneath it. That takes courage. Didn't feel like courage, felt like falling apart in public. Sometimes they're the same thing. It takes courage to let yourself feel pain instead of pushing it down. I learned that in therapy. As the evening wore on, Tommy realized he felt more alive than he had in years. Having someone truly listen to his story, someone who understood the complexity of his feelings about his service and his country, was like medicine he hadn't known he needed. Around 10 o'clock, Bruce finally stood to leave. "Tommy, I want to ask you something, and I need you to think about it seriously before you answer." Tommy nodded, curious. "I'm recording a new album, and I've been struggling with one particular song. It's about Vietnam, about the way we treated our returning soldiers, about the gap between the America we promised you and the America you came home to. I've written and rewritten it a dozen times, but it's not right. I think it's because I'm writing about something I didn't experience firsthand." Bruce paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you be willing to help me with it? Not as a songwriter, I'd do the actual writing, but as a collaborator who could help me get the truth right?" Tommy was stunned. "You want me to help you write a song?" "I want you to help me tell your story. The story of guys like you who served their country and came home to something they didn't expect. I can't do it justice without understanding it from the inside." Tommy felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. "I'd be honored to help you, but I don't know anything about writing songs. You know about living the truth I'm trying to capture. That's more valuable than any technical knowledge about songwriting." Before leaving, Bruce wrote his personal phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to Tommy. "Call me tomorrow evening if you're serious about this. We'll start meeting regularly, maybe once or twice a week. I want to hear all of it. The good, the bad, the complicated parts that don't fit into simple narratives about heroes and villains." After Bruce left, Tommy sat in his living room staring at the phone number, wondering if the entire day had been an elaborate dream. But the Chinese takeout containers were still on his table, and he could still smell the faint scent of Bruce's cologne in the air. For the first time in years, Tommy was excited about tomorrow. Over the next several weeks, Bruce came to Tommy's house regularly. Sometimes they worked on the song, with Bruce playing rough melodies on an acoustic guitar, while Tommy shared memories and emotions that helped shape the lyrics. Other times, they simply talked about life, music, family, and the challenge of finding meaning in difficult experiences. Tommy discovered that beneath the rock star persona, Bruce was a thoughtful, introspective man who took his role as a storyteller seriously. He didn't just want to write a good song, he wanted to honor the experiences of men like Tommy and give voice to feelings that had been suppressed for too long. "The hardest part about coming home," Tommy told Bruce during one of their sessions, "wasn't the protesters or the indifference. It was the feeling that I had to choose between being proud of my service and being critical of the war. Like those two things couldn't exist at the same time." Bruce wrote that down in the notebook he'd started carrying. "Explain that more." "I was proud of serving my country, proud of the men I served with, of the courage they showed, of the bonds we formed. But I also came to believe the war was wrong, that we were sacrificing good people for bad reasons. For years, I felt like admitting the war was wrong meant betraying my friends who died there, and being proud of my service meant supporting something I couldn't support." "So you got stuck between honor and truth," Bruce said. "Exactly. And for 50 years, I've been carrying both of those feelings without knowing how to resolve them." The song that emerged from these conversations was unlike anything Bruce had written before. It was raw and complex, refusing to offer simple answers to complicated questions. Instead of choosing between patriotism and protest, it honored both the service of Vietnam veterans and the legitimate questions about the war they fought. Tommy contributed more than just his story to the process. His instinctive understanding of which emotions felt authentic and which felt forced helped Bruce craft lyrics that rang true. When Bruce would play a verse and ask Tommy how it felt, Tommy could immediately identify lines that sounded like they came from someone who had actually lived the experience versus lines that sounded like an outsider's interpretation. "That part about coming home to silence," Tommy said during one session. "It's close, but not quite right. It wasn't silence that hurt, it was the wrong kind of noise. People arguing about the war, but nobody talking about the warriors. We became symbols instead of people. Bruce revised the line. Came home to a country talking about the war, but nobody asking about the warrior. That's it, Tommy said. That's exactly it. As winter turned to spring, Tommy began to notice changes in himself that went beyond his collaboration with Bruce. The regular social interaction, the sense of purpose, and the feeling that his experiences mattered had awakened parts of him that had been dormant for years. He started leaving the house more often, taking walks around his neighborhood and even striking up conversations with neighbors he'd previously avoided. Sarah, from the Veterans Outreach Program, noticed the change immediately during her weekly visits. "You seem different, Mr. Mackenzie," she said during one of their meetings. "More present, if that makes sense." "I feel different," Tommy admitted. "For the first time in decades, I feel like my story matters, like all those years of pain might actually serve a purpose." Sarah smiled. "I'm so glad to hear that. Has the celebrity involvement in your case been helpful, or has it felt intrusive?" Tommy had never told Sarah exactly who had inquired about him. He'd simply said that someone from the concert had donated to the program. Now he wondered if he should reveal Bruce's identity, but decided against it. Their friendship had developed beyond the initial charitable gesture, and he wanted to protect its privacy. "It's been helpful," he said simply, "more than I ever expected." Meanwhile, word of Bruce's regular visits to Freehold had begun to circulate among neighbors, though most assumed he was visiting family or friends in the area. Bruce was careful to arrive and leave discreetly, parking his modest sedan in Tommy's garage and avoiding the kind of fanfare that would draw attention. One afternoon in April, Tommy's ex-wife Margaret called with her usual Sunday check-in, but this time she had questions. "Tommy, Mrs. Patterson next door says she's seen Bruce Springsteen going into your house several times. Please tell me you haven't hired some expensive impersonator with the grocery money." Tommy laughed, a sound that surprised Margaret, since she rarely heard him express genuine joy anymore. "It's a long story, Maggie, but it's really him, and he's been helping me with something." "Helping you with what? And why?" Tommy gave her an abbreviated version of the story, carefully omitting details that might make Bruce seem like he was treating Tommy as a charity case. Margaret listened in amazement, asking questions that revealed both her concern for Tommy's mental state and her genuine curiosity about this unlikely friendship. "He sounds like a good man," she said finally. "Very different from what I expected a rock star to be like. He is a good man. And Maggie, I know this sounds strange coming from me, but I feel like I'm getting better. Not cured, not fixed, but better." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I can hear it in your voice. You sound more like the man I married than you have in years." That evening, Tommy called his daughter Jennifer in California and his son Michael in North Carolina. He'd maintained minimal contact with his children since the divorce, partly out of shame and partly to protect them from his unpredictable moods. But Margaret's comment about sounding more like his old self had given him courage. Both conversations were tentative at first, his children clearly surprised to hear from him outside of major holidays. But as Tommy shared some of what had been happening in his life, carefully edited versions that focused on his involvement with the Veterans Program and his renewed interest in life, he could hear their relief and cautious optimism. "Dad, I've been worried about you for years," Jennifer said. "Every time I called, you sounded so distant and sad. This is the first time in I don't know how long that you've sounded like you want to be part of the world." "I'm trying, sweetheart. For the first time in a long time, I'm really trying." Michael was more direct. "What changed, Dad? I mean, I'm grateful, but you've been in such a dark place for so long. Did something specific happen?" Tommy thought about how to answer. "I met someone who helped me understand that my story matters, that all those years of pain weren't just wasted time, but experiences that could help other people if I was willing to share them." Both children expressed interest in visiting, something that would have filled Tommy with anxiety just months earlier. Now, he found himself looking forward to the possibility. By May, the song Bruce and Tommy had been working on was nearly complete. They'd recorded several rough versions in Tommy's living room using Bruce's portable equipment, refining the melody and lyrics with each iteration. The process had been therapeutic for Tommy, allowing him to process his Vietnam experiences in a new way, while giving Bruce the authentic perspective he'd been seeking. "I want you to hear something," Bruce said during one of their sessions. He set up his equipment and played a fully produced version of their song, recorded at his home studio with a full band. Tommy listened in amazement as his story came to life through Bruce's music. The guitar work was subtle and haunting, the vocals delivered with a rawness that matched the emotional content of the lyrics. When the song ended, Tommy wiped away tears. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's exactly how it felt." "I want to play this for my record label next week," Bruce said. "If they approve it for the album, would you be comfortable with me telling people that a Vietnam veteran helped write it? I wouldn't use your name unless you wanted me to, but I'd like people to know this came from someone who lived it." Tommy considered the question. Part of him still preferred the anonymity he'd maintained for so long, but another part, the part that had been awakened through their friendship, felt ready to step forward. "Use my name," he said. "If this song helps even one other veteran feel less alone, then it's worth any discomfort I might feel about the attention." Bruce smiled and shook his hand. "Tommy Mackenzie, co-writer. It has a nice ring to it." 3 weeks later, Bruce called with news that the record label had not only approved the song, but wanted it to be the lead single from his upcoming album. They were planning a music video and had asked Bruce to consider performing it at the upcoming Veterans Day concert at Madison Square Garden. "There's something else," Bruce said. "They want you to introduce the song at the Madison Square Garden show. Just a brief statement about why this story needed to be told." Tommy felt his old anxiety rising. "I don't know if I can handle that kind of crowd, Bruce. The concert where I met you, I couldn't even stay for the whole show. This would be different. You wouldn't be alone in the audience with your memories. You'd be on stage with me, sharing your story on your own terms. But if it's too much, I understand." Tommy thought about it for days. The idea of standing in front of thousands of people terrified him, but it also represented something he'd never thought possible, turning his pain into something that might help others. He called Bruce back a week later. "I'll do it, but I want to write my own introduction, and I want to practice it with you first. Of course, we'll rehearse it until you feel completely comfortable." The months leading up to the Veterans Day concert were a whirlwind of activity for Tommy. The song's impending release had generated media interest, and several reporters wanted to interview the Vietnam veteran who had collaborated with Bruce Springsteen. Tommy agreed to a few carefully selected interviews, using them as opportunities to talk about the challenges faced by aging veterans and the importance of community support. Sarah from the Veterans Outreach Program was thrilled by the attention Tommy's story was bringing to their organization. Donations had increased significantly, and they'd been able to expand their services to reach more isolated veterans in the region. "You've become something of a celebrity in the veterans community," Sarah told Tommy during one of her visits. "People are saying your willingness to share your story has inspired them to seek help for their own struggles." Tommy found this both gratifying and humbling. For most of his adult life, he'd felt like his experiences were a burden to others. The idea that sharing those experiences could actually help people was still difficult for him to fully accept. As Veterans Day approached, Tommy's children made plans to attend the Madison Square Garden concert. Margaret, who had maintained her distance since their divorce, also asked if she could come. "I want to see this new chapter of your life," she told him during one of their phone calls, "and I want to support you when you tell your story." The night before the concert, Bruce came to Tommy's house for a final rehearsal. They'd practiced Tommy's introduction dozens of times, but both men knew that performing it in front of 20,000 people would be different from practicing it in a living room. "You don't have to look at the audience," Bruce reminded him. "Look at me, or look at the back wall, or close your eyes if you need to. The important thing is that you speak from your heart." Tommy nodded, fingering the small index card with his talking points. He'd memorized every word, but having it in his pocket made him feel more secure. "Bruce, I need to ask you something," Tommy said. "Why did you really do this? I mean, I know you saw me at the concert and felt bad for me, but this has become much more than a charitable gesture. You've spent months of your life helping me work through 50-year-old trauma. Why?" Bruce was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what you said to me the first day we met about feeling stuck between the jungle and home?" Tommy nodded. "I've felt stuck my whole life too, just in a different way. Stuck between the working-class world I came from and the wealthy world I ended up in. Stuck between wanting to be a voice for regular people and living a life that's anything but regular. Working with you, hearing your story, helping you find your voice, it's helped me remember why I became a musician in the first place." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You gave me something too, Tommy. You reminded me that music at its best isn't entertainment, it's connection. It's one person saying to another, 'You're not alone in this.'" The next evening, Tommy stood in the wings at Madison Square Garden, watching Bruce perform his set for thousands of adoring fans. The energy in the arena was electric, but Tommy felt surprisingly calm. Over the months of their friendship, he'd learned to trust Bruce completely, and that trust extended to this moment. When Bruce introduced him to the audience, Tommy walked onto the stage with steady steps. The crowd was respectfully quiet as he approached the microphone, his index card clutched in his hand. "My name is Tommy Mackenzie," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. 54 years ago, I came home from Vietnam to a country that didn't know what to do with me. For most of those years, I felt like my story didn't matter, like my pain was something I had to carry alone." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. 7 months ago, I went to a Bruce Springsteen concert and had an emotional breakdown during Born in the USA. I ran out of that show feeling embarrassed and more isolated than ever. But someone in the audience that night saw my pain and decided to do something about it. Tommy glanced at Bruce, who was standing nearby with his guitar, smiling encouragingly. Bruce Springsteen didn't have to care about one broken-down old soldier. He could have forgotten about me the moment I left his concert. Instead, he found me, befriended me, and helped me turn my pain into something that might help other people. He showed me that our stories matter, that our struggles can become our strength, and that none of us have to face our demons alone. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. The song we're about to perform together was born from our friendship and from the belief that when we share our truths with each other, we all become a little less alone. This is for every veteran who's ever felt forgotten, and for everyone who's ever felt like their pain didn't matter. Your story matters. You matter. The crowd erupted in applause as Tommy stepped back from the microphone. Bruce moved forward and began the opening chords of their song, and for the first time since his return from Vietnam, Tommy felt truly proud of his service and his sacrifice. As Bruce sang the lyrics they'd crafted together, Tommy stood beside him, no longer the isolated man who'd fled a concert in tears, but a survivor who'd found his voice and learned to use it. The song's final chorus echoed through the arena, "Born in the USA, but the America I fought for wasn't the America I found, still searching for the promised land, still standing on this sacred ground. Born in the USA, carrying stories that need to be told. Born in the USA, but I'm finally coming home." When the song ended, the silence in Madison Square Garden lasted for several heartbeats before the entire arena erupted in thunderous applause. Tommy felt tears streaming down his face, but for the first time in decades, they were tears of healing rather than pain. Bruce embraced him on stage, and Tommy could hear him whisper, "You did it, my friend. You told your story, and they heard you." As they walked off stage together, Tommy felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a moment of breakdown at a concert had transformed into a moment of breakthrough on one of music's biggest stages. After the show, Tommy was reunited with his children and ex-wife backstage. Jennifer hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "Dad, I'm so proud of you. I've never seen you look so alive." Michael shook his father's hand, then pulled him into an embrace. "You were incredible up there. I finally understand why you've been different these past few months." Margaret approached more tentatively, but her eyes were warm. "Tommy, that was beautiful. The song, your introduction, all of it. You've found your voice again." Bruce joined them, and Tommy made the introductions. His family was clearly starstruck, but Bruce put them at ease with his genuine warmth and interest in hearing their perspectives on Tommy's transformation. "Your father is one of the bravest men I've ever met," Bruce told Tommy's children. "It takes incredible courage to turn your pain into art that can help other people. He didn't just help me write a song. He helped me understand what it means to serve something bigger than yourself." Over the following weeks, the song climbed the charts, and the story of its creation spread through social media and news outlets. Tommy found himself becoming an inadvertent spokesperson for Vietnam veterans' issues, a role he embraced with growing confidence. The Veterans Administration reached out to him about speaking at hospitals and treatment centers, sharing his story with other veterans who struggled with PTSD and isolation. Tommy discovered he had a gift for connecting with men and women who had served in various conflicts, all of whom recognized the universal experience of carrying invisible wounds from their service. During one visit to a VA hospital in Philadelphia, Tommy met a young Marine named David who'd lost both legs to an IED in Afghanistan. David was angry, bitter, and convinced his life was effectively over at 24. "You don't understand," David told Tommy during their conversation. "At least when you guys came home from Vietnam, you came home whole. I'm never going to be the same person I was before." Tommy sat quietly for a moment, then rolled up his sleeve to reveal a long scar running from his wrist to his elbow. "Shrapnel from a mortar round near Da Nang," he said. "But you're right. My scars are mostly on the inside, which made them easier to hide but harder to heal." He spent 2 hours with David, not offering false optimism or easy answers, but simply sharing his own journey from isolation to connection, from shame to purpose. When he left, David asked for his phone number. "I might want to call you sometime," David said, "if that's okay." "Any time," Tommy replied, "day or night." 6 months after the Madison Square Garden concert, Tommy received a call that would change his life yet again. Bruce was on the line with a proposal that seemed almost as surreal as their original meeting. "Tommy, I've been thinking about something and I want to run it by you. What would you think about starting a foundation together? Something focused on helping isolated veterans connect with their communities and find ways to share their stories." Tommy was quiet, processing the magnitude of what Bruce was suggesting. "We could fund veterans' programs, sponsor storytelling workshops, maybe even help other veterans collaborate on creative projects like we did. The song has shown us that there's power in bringing these stories to light." "Bruce, I appreciate the thought, but I don't know anything about running a foundation." "Neither did I when I started my other charitable work. We'd hire people who know what they're doing, but the vision would come from us, from what we've learned together." Tommy thought about all the veterans he'd met over the past months, the men and women carrying stories that needed to be heard. What would we call it? "I was thinking the Sacred Ground Foundation, from the line in our song about standing on sacred ground. The idea that every veteran's service, regardless of the war or the outcome, represents sacred ground that deserves to be honored." Within a year, the Sacred Ground Foundation had become one of the most innovative veterans organizations in the country. They funded programs that paired veterans with artists, writers, and musicians to help them tell their stories. They sponsored support groups that focused on purpose and connection rather than just treatment. They created scholarships for veterans pursuing creative arts as a form of healing. Tommy discovered he had a talent for administration and public speaking that he'd never known existed. He traveled the country, sharing his story and the Foundation's mission, always emphasizing that healing comes not from forgetting the past, but from finding ways to make it meaningful. Bruce remained involved, but let Tommy take the lead role, understanding that the Foundation's credibility came from being veteran-led rather than celebrity-driven. He provided funding and used his platform to raise awareness, but the daily work of helping veterans heal and find their voices became Tommy's calling. One morning, almost 2 years after their first meeting, Tommy was in his home office, the spare bedroom he'd converted into Foundation headquarters, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mackenzie, this is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, U.S. Army. I served 3 tours in Iraq, and I just wanted to thank you." Tommy set down his coffee and gave her his full attention. "Thank you for what, Sergeant? I heard your song on the radio 6 months ago, and it saved my life. I was planning to... Well, I was in a very dark place. But hearing your story, knowing that someone else had felt that lost and found their way back, it gave me hope. I called the Foundation's hotline that night." Tommy felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he was reminded of how close so many veterans came to giving up entirely. "I'm glad you called, Maria. How are you doing now?" "I'm doing better. I joined one of your storytelling groups in San Antonio, and I've been working with a local musician on songs about my deployment experiences. But mostly, I just wanted you to know that your willingness to share your story gave me permission to share mine, and sharing my story gave me a reason to keep living it." After Maria hung up, Tommy sat in his office thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 2 years ago, he'd been a broken man contemplating whether life was worth continuing. Today, he was helping other veterans discover that their stories mattered, that their pain could become their purpose. The Foundation had helped hundreds of veterans find new ways to process their experiences and connect with their communities. Some had become artists, others had become advocates, still others had simply learned to be present for their families in ways they hadn't been able to before. Each success story felt like a vindication of Tommy's own struggle and healing. That evening, Bruce called with his usual weekly check-in. Their friendship had evolved from the intense collaboration of those early months into something more comfortable, but no less meaningful. "How was your day, partner?" Bruce asked. Tommy told him about Maria's call and several other conversations he'd had with veterans who'd been helped by the Foundation's programs. "You know what amazes me?" Bruce said. 2 years ago, you thought your story didn't matter to anyone. Now your story is literally saving lives." "Our story," Tommy corrected. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't seen something in that broken-down old soldier crying at your concert. I saw someone who needed to know he wasn't alone. I had no idea I was meeting someone who would become one of the most important collaborators of my career." As they talked, Tommy looked around his office at the walls, covered with letters from veterans, photos from Foundation events, and awards recognizing their work. In the center of it all was the original photograph Sarah had shown him, the image of him crying at Bruce's concert that had started everything. He'd kept it as a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd traveled. But more than that, it served as a symbol of the moment when his greatest vulnerability had become his greatest strength. "Bruce, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Getting involved with a stranger's problems instead of just playing your music and going home?" Bruce was quiet for a moment. "Tommy, working with you changed my music, my perspective, and my life. Our friendship and the foundation we built together will be part of my legacy long after people forget most of my songs. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to understand that the most important stories are often carried by the people who think their stories don't matter." That night, Tommy had the best sleep he'd experienced in over 50 years. No nightmares, no anxiety, just the peaceful rest of a man who had found his purpose. The next morning brought news that would add another chapter to his unlikely story. Bruce called early, his voice filled with excitement. "Tommy, are you sitting down? The Grammy nominating committee just called. Our song has been nominated for Song of the Year." Tommy nearly dropped his coffee mug. "A Grammy nomination? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. And here's the best part. If we win, we both get the award. You'll be a Grammy-winning songwriter, my friend." The Grammy Awards ceremony 3 months later was unlike anything Tommy had ever imagined experiencing. Walking down the red carpet with Bruce, surrounded by the biggest names in music, he felt like he was living someone else's life. During the pre-ceremony interviews, reporters asked him about his transformation from unknown veteran to Grammy nominee. Tommy used each opportunity to talk about the foundation and the importance of listening to veterans' stories. "This nomination isn't really about me," he told one interviewer. "It's about the thousands of veterans whose stories haven't been heard yet. Every one of them has experiences that could inspire, educate, or heal someone else. My job is to help them find their voices." When their category was announced, Tommy felt surprisingly calm. Whether they won or lost, the nomination itself was a validation of their work and a platform for the Foundation's mission. "And the Grammy Award for Song of the Year goes to..." The presenter paused dramatically. "Bruce Springsteen and Thomas Mackenzie for Sacred Ground." The moment felt surreal as Tommy walked onto the stage at the Staples Center, accepting his Grammy Award in front of music's biggest stars and millions of television viewers worldwide. But when he stepped up to the microphone for his acceptance speech, his voice was steady and his message was clear. "This award belongs to every veteran who has ever struggled to make sense of their service and sacrifice. Bruce Springsteen saw me at my lowest moment and chose to care about my story. That choice changed both our lives and led to the creation of the Sacred Ground Foundation, which has now helped over 1,000 veterans find healing through sharing their experiences." He held up the Grammy. "This isn't going on my shelf at home. It's going to our foundation's headquarters as a reminder that every veteran's story matters, that pain can become purpose, and that none of us have to face our battles alone." The audience gave him a standing ovation, but Tommy was thinking about David, the young Marine he'd met at the VA hospital 2 years earlier. David had called him just that morning to say he'd enrolled in college and was planning to study social work so he could help other wounded veterans. After the ceremony, at the Grammy after-party, Tommy found himself in conversation with other musicians who wanted to know more about the foundation and how they could get involved. Several offered to participate in benefit concerts, while others expressed interest in collaborating with veterans on their own projects. "You've started something big here," a famous country singer told him. "Musicians have always told stories, but you've shown us how to help other people tell their own stories. That's powerful." Flying back to New Jersey the next morning, Grammy Award in his carry-on bag, Tommy reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. Less than 3 years ago, he'd been a man without hope, convinced his life had no meaning or purpose. Today, he was returning home as a Grammy winner and the co-founder of a thriving organization that was changing lives across the country. But the most important change wasn't external. It was the transformation that had occurred within himself. He'd learned that vulnerability could become strength, that isolation could become connection, and that the experiences he'd spent decades trying to forget could become the foundation for helping others heal. When he arrived home, Tommy placed the Grammy on his desk next to the photograph from Bruce's concert. The contrast between the two images, one representing his lowest moment, the other his greatest triumph, told the complete story of his transformation. His phone rang, interrupting his reflection. The caller ID showed it was Jennifer, his daughter in California. "Dad, I just saw your Grammy speech on the internet. I'm so proud of you I can't even find the words." Thank you, sweetheart. But you know, the Grammy is just a symbol. The real victory is waking up every day, knowing that I can help someone else who's struggling the way I was struggling. You've become the father I always knew was inside there somewhere, but who got lost for a while after the war. I'm so grateful you found your way back to us. That evening, Tommy did something he hadn't done in years. He called his old friend Jimmy Patterson, a Vietnam veteran he'd served with who lived in Arizona. They'd lost touch after Tommy's divorce, partly because Tommy had withdrawn from everyone who reminded him of the war. "Tommy Mackenzie!" Jimmy's voice was filled with surprise and delight. "I saw you on television tonight at those Grammy Awards. I couldn't believe my eyes. Is that really you?" "It's really me, Jimmy, and I owe you an apology for disappearing on you all those years ago." "Hell, Tommy, we all dealt with coming home differently. I'm just glad you found your way through it. That speech you gave tonight, about veterans' stories mattering, that hit me right in the heart." They talked for 2 hours, catching up on decades of lost time. Jimmy had struggled too, though he'd managed to maintain his marriage and relationships with his children. He'd followed Tommy's story in the news and was amazed by his transformation. "You know what you've done?" Jimmy said. "You've given guys like us permission to be proud of our service again, even if we have mixed feelings about the war. For 50 years, I felt like I had to choose between honoring my service and acknowledging that the war was wrong. Your song says I can do both." Before they hung up, Jimmy made a request that would lead to yet another expansion of Tommy's mission. "Tommy, I've got a group of Vietnam vets here in Phoenix who get together once a month. We mostly just drink coffee and complain about our aches and pains. But after hearing your story, some of us are thinking we might have our own stories worth telling. Would you consider coming out here to talk to us?" 6 months later, Tommy was traveling regularly as a speaker, visiting veteran groups across the country and helping them establish their own storytelling programs. The Sacred Ground Foundation had grown to include regional coordinators in 12 states, each working to connect isolated veterans with their local communities. Bruce remained actively involved, using his concerts as platforms to raise awareness and funds for veteran issues. At every show, he would perform Sacred Ground and tell the audience about Tommy's journey from isolation to purpose. "This song exists because one man was brave enough to cry in public," Bruce would tell his audiences. "And because we chose to see his pain as a call to action, rather than something to be ignored. Every one of you has the power to notice when someone is struggling and choose to care. That's how healing happens, one connection at a time." On the 3rd anniversary of their first meeting, Bruce surprised Tommy with a visit to his house. Tommy was in his office, working on grant applications to expand the foundation's reach, when the doorbell rang. "Don't you ever call ahead anymore?" Tommy asked with a smile as he opened the door. "Where's the fun in that?" Bruce replied, carrying a bottle of champagne and a wrapped package. They sat in Tommy's living room, now warmly decorated with family photos, foundation awards, and memorabilia from their shared journey. The house that had once felt like a mausoleum had become a home again. "I brought you something," Bruce said, handing Tommy the package. Inside was a leather-bound book titled Sacred Ground, The Tommy Mackenzie Story. Tommy opened it to find a collection of letters from veterans who had been helped by the foundation, newspaper articles about their work, photos from foundation events, and a foreword written by Bruce. "I wanted you to have a record of what you've accomplished," Bruce said. "Sometimes I don't think you fully grasp how many lives you've changed." Tommy paged through the book, reading testimonials from veterans across the country who credited the foundation with helping them find purpose, reconnect with family, or simply choose to keep living. Each story was a reminder that sharing his own story had created ripple effects he could never have imagined. "There's something else," Bruce said. "The foundation's board of directors met last week, and they voted to rename it. As of next month, it will be called the Tommy Mackenzie Sacred Ground Foundation." Tommy looked up in surprise. "Bruce, I can't let you do that. This was your idea as much as mine." No, my friend, I may have suggested starting a foundation, but everything it became came from your vision, your leadership, and your heart. The veterans we help trust the foundation because they know it's led by someone who's walked in their boots, that someone is you. As they toasted with champagne, Tommy thought about the man he'd been 3 years earlier, isolated, bitter, and convinced his life had no value. That man would never have believed that his lowest moment would become the foundation for the most meaningful chapter of his life. Bruce, I need to ask you something I've wondered about for 3 years. Shoot. That night at your concert when you saw me crying, what made you decide to do something about it? You must see emotional reactions from audience members all the time. Bruce thought carefully about his answer. There was something about the way you were crying that told me you weren't just moved by the music, you were living it. The pain was so raw and real that it reminded me why I started writing songs in the first place, to help people feel less alone with their struggles. He paused, looking at the Grammy Award on Tommy's desk. But honestly, Tommy, I had no idea that reaching out to you would change my life as much as it changed yours. Our friendship taught me that the most powerful thing any of us can do is simply show up for each other. That night, Tommy sat on his front porch, looking up at the stars and thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. Tomorrow, he would fly to Seattle to speak at a veterans conference. Next week, he had meetings with filmmakers who wanted to make a documentary about the foundation. Next month, he would testify before Congress about the need for increased funding for veterans' mental health programs. But tonight, he was simply a man at peace with his past and excited about his future. The nightmares that had plagued him for 50 years had largely disappeared, replaced by dreams about the veterans he could still help and the stories that still needed to be told. His phone buzzed with a text message from David, the young Marine he'd met at the VA hospital years earlier. David had graduated from college and was now working as a counselor at a veterans treatment center in Texas. Just wanted you to know I helped a Vietnam vet today who reminded me of you when we first met. Angry, isolated, convinced his life was over. I told him your story and gave him the foundation's number. He's going to call tomorrow. Thank you for showing me that our scars can become our strength. Tommy smiled and typed back, thank you for passing it forward. That's how healing happens. One veteran helping another. As he prepared for bed, Tommy stopped at the bathroom mirror and looked at the reflection staring back at him. The man in the mirror bore little resemblance to the broken soul who had fled Bruce Springsteen's concert in tears 3 years earlier. This man stood straighter, smiled easier, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his purpose. Not bad for a broken-down old soldier, he said to his reflection. The next morning brought news that would add another unexpected chapter to Tommy's remarkable story. Sarah from the Veterans Outreach Program called with excitement in her voice. Tommy, I just got off the phone with the White House. The President wants to meet with you next month to discuss veterans' issues and present you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Tommy sat down heavily in his kitchen chair. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. Are you sure they have the right person? They specifically asked for Thomas Mackenzie, co-founder of the Tommy Mackenzie Sacred Ground Foundation, Grammy Award-winning songwriter, and advocate for veterans' mental health. That's you, isn't it? 3 weeks later, Tommy stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, surrounded by his family, Bruce, and other recipients of the nation's highest civilian honor. When the president placed the medal around his neck, Tommy thought about all the veterans who had shared their stories with him over the past 3 years. This medal represents every veteran who has ever felt forgotten, Tommy said in his acceptance speech. It honors not just my journey from isolation to purpose, but the potential for healing that exists in every person who has served our country. We are not broken. We are beautifully scarred, and our scars tell stories that can heal others. After the ceremony, Tommy and Bruce stood together in the White House lawn, both men reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. You know what the best part of all this is? Bruce asked. What's that? 3 years ago, you thought your story was over. Today, you're standing in the White House as proof that it's never too late for a new beginning. Tommy nodded, fingering the medal around his neck. And the best part for me is knowing that every veteran who sees this medal will understand that their story matters too. That their pain can become their purpose, and their struggles can become their strength. As they walked back toward the White House, Tommy's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number from Montana. Mr. McKenzie, this is Colonel Patricia Williams, retired Air Force. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've been struggling since I retired last year. I saw your speech at the White House today, and I was wondering, do you think someone like me could find the kind of purpose you found? Tommy stopped walking and gave Patricia his full attention. Colonel, I know exactly how you're feeling right now, and I want you to know that your story is just beginning. Can you hold on while I give you the number for our foundation coordinator in Montana? As Tommy connected another veteran with resources and hope, Bruce watched his friend with admiration. The man who had once believed his story didn't matter to anyone had become living proof that every story matters, every person has value, and it's never too late to transform pain into purpose. Their song, Sacred Ground, continued to play on radio stations across the country, reaching new audiences and inspiring more veterans to seek help and share their stories. But more than any Grammy Award or presidential medal, the true measure of their success was found in the thousands of veterans who had discovered that they were not alone, that their experiences mattered, and that their best chapters might still be ahead of them. Tommy McKenzie had learned the most important truth of all. Sometimes the person you think you're helping ends up helping you even more. And sometimes the moment when you think your story is ending is actually the moment when your most important chapter begins. Standing in the shadow of the White House, surrounded by family and friends, Tommy understood that his journey from a crying man at a concert to a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient was really a story about the transformative power of human connection. One person's willingness to see another person's pain and choose to care had created ripple effects that would continue long after both men were gone. The war veteran who cried at Bruce Springsteen's show had indeed found his way home, not to the America he had fought for, but to an understanding of what it truly means to serve others and honor the sacred ground of shared human experience. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., Tommy McKenzie smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to help other veterans discover that their stories mattered, their pain could become their purpose, and they were never as alone as they thought they were. The boss had indeed appeared at his door that day 3 years ago. But the real miracle was discovering that Tommy McKenzie had been a boss all along, the boss of his own story, the architect of his own healing, and the author of his own redemption. And that story was still being written, one veteran at a time, one connection at a time, one moment of courage at a time.